a better world, one in which it is absolutely more just, then I think, like many of us, I was at this university in 1977. I came here after the 76 uprising. I was part of the student uprising at Durban Westville, which was the only university Indian students could go to. And I was kicked out of that university, which is how I ended up at FITS. But when we were here, we had a policy that we did not participate in anything because we believed that you could not have a normal life in an abnormal society. So the kind of things you enjoy at this university, we didn't. And when I first came, I remember sitting in a lecture room where many of the university lecturers who were here didn't actually want us here. You could stick up your hand and they would pretend that they would see right through you. And so even at FITS, there is some accounting, I think, to be had. But at the same time, all of us were connected to other civil society movements. And in fact, at this university, many times we went on strike because what we campaigned for was a just society. One of my colleagues, in fact, spent most of his final year of his LLB in detention, in solitary confinement. So it was a living experience for us. Today, of course, it is much more difficult because it is really possible to live in South Africa without caring for the poor. The only signs you will see is perhaps on the street corner when someone is begging for money or when you hear about the Marikana strike. And I think that what we have to do is to take the power back, the blank check that we give our government, we have to take that back. And in fact, what we have to do is campaign for a better society. If we go on like this, very soon it will be impossible to hold back the millions of South Africans who don't have anything. You just have to go to the rural area and just go to an informal settlement, and I think you will see what life is like. And yet if you live in the suburbs, high walls, higher electrical fences that are turned on, armed guards who patrol the streets, cordoned off suburbs, that is not a way to live. And that is something we need to challenge our societies about. It is absolutely outrageous and obscene, really. I have nothing about people's personal wealth, but it is obscene when people drive cars and you look at the guy at the bottom and he has nothing. Something has to account for that gap.
I'm going to offer just one more round of questions.
Ms. Sooka, can I just change the setting a bit?
Yeah.
I was thinking about, we've been talking about serious human rights abuses, and I've been thinking some of them are not as spectacular or as visible as what we've been talking about. Why I'm changing the scenario, which I'm thinking about Zimbabwe, there were people who lost their pensions. So you work for 45 years, then suddenly it's time to retire. But you can't even live for 2 months on your pension. So we're talking about millions and millions of people. So my question to you is, assuming we had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Zimbabwe, wouldn't the issue of pensions, these disappeared pensions, be one of the key things that we should address?
Any other questions?
Today we're actually talking about the Children's Reconciliation Commission action. Our lecturer said something very interesting. Your question was asked if the national community was going to pressure you to actually extradite all the leaders of the traffic to prosecute, were you going to? And actually say, no, I was never going to do that. And I don't know its motives, but what I want to get at is that I just want to know the kind of justice that you're looking for, and what the TRC was looking for, because I have a concern in using retributive justice when you're trying to create a kind of, rainbow nation or this non-racial society. South Africa used kind of a retributive when those leaders were really prosecuted and punished in jail. Was it really conducive to the kind of vision that equality is there, especially.
Okay, let me start with the Zimbabwe question. I was in Zimbabwe, I think about 3 times last year when the government began introducing this healing organ. I think that this question of, a loss of deprivation, the pensions, is a huge issue, and certainly if the Truth Commission was set up, they would really need to look at this issue, and this is of course one of the economic issues which I think Truth Commission should look at. I'll give you an example, if you haven't seen it, but Angelina Jolie's film, which of course is fiction, but is one which really brings home In the Land of Milk and Honey. It was playing last week at the Nouveau Cinema in Rosebank. But it gives you a sense of how today you can be a citizen and tomorrow you can be absolutely homeless, displaced, left with nothing. And in fact, if you talk to many of the families, particularly the women in the Balkans, what I think they experienced most was this complete sense of not just identity, but also the loss of everything. Many of them were very wealthy, but they had to flee. And in fact, if you look at the Dayton settlement, all he did was create, new enclaves, and people really lost out on everything. In Tunisia, for instance, and certainly in Libya as well, the government, of course, imprisoned a number of people as political prisoners, but they didn't only stop there. What they also removed from people were pensions. The families lost out. The families themselves went onto lists and could not access employment. So one of the first laws that the Tunisian government published actually was a law that would in fact restore to these people all the things that they lost. So I think it's a very, very important issue and really hits home at how I have many friends from Latin America who argue that what a Truth Commission should do is only look at the most serious crimes, and they classify that as your traditional ones, torture, the extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances. And what many of us argue is, if you go back, and I'm trying to think of who the person was who talked about structural violence. What is worse? When you slowly die because of things that have been taken away from you, because of poverty, because you can't put food in your mouths. And I think for many countries in Africa, this is a very, very real issue. And all of us know when you need money, when can't you work? It's when you're old. So if you lose that, what you lose is a real sense of stability, security, but also the potential to live properly with dignity. And I think that it's an important aspect. Your question touches on, I think, what remains an enduring debate in our field. And some people talk about the peace versus justice debate. One should also remember that in the South African context, the reason the government could get away with the amnesty deal was because at that time the Rome Statute was not yet in force. And in fact, I think a year before the Rome Statute was finally sort of concluded, there was a conference in Syracuse where the South African amnesty came up. And I think nobody wanted to denude it of any value. And so people say, well, as long as the prosecutor would say that accountability had been dealt with. And of course, if you look at the Truth Commission, it is probably done more successfully than many trials at any kind of the international tribunals. But I think there's a big question, which is, after Sierra Leone, when the Lomé Peace Accord was being signed, the government in Sierra Leone actually offered the rebels in 3 peace agreements an amnesty deal. And so when the final deal was being concluded and the UN woke up in New York and realized that they were going to be party to an amnesty deal, they instructed their representative on the ground to enter a reservation on the agreement. And this is the first time that the UN says officially the UN cannot be party to an amnesty for war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. And of course today, This is meant to be the normative framework. And so even where governments give themselves amnesty, everybody knows that that amnesty in fact can be set aside, as it happened in Sierra Leone in the special court. And of course Charles Taylor argued that the African leadership had promised him immunity, and that of course was stripped. So I think there is a big question. There is a moment often, and you must remember, when you have a negotiated settlement, who is sitting at the table? All the guys who want an amnesty. And so it's often not possible to create an opportunity for accountability. But what we have advised many countries to do is to say, what you should always have is that the government is committed in the Constitution to addressing the past through the 4 pillars: the right to the truth, the right to justice, to reparations, and the guarantee of non-repetition. And hopefully at some point, when the country is more stable, you will be able to prosecute. Do I believe that we should extradite? I believe that absolutely. And I think that in our country, because the politicians did not apply, that they should have been put on trial. And of course you've seen this debate rage furiously in the last few days, because the Archbishop pulled out of the Discovery seminar. Why did he pull out? Because there are many people across the world who said to him, you cannot sit on the same stage and share platform and give legitimacy to a man who should be tried as a war criminal. And in the case of Tony Blair, we must remember that a commission in London found that at the time he went to war, there was no proof that in fact there were weapons of destruction. And in fact, even today we know, have they found the weapons? So, these are very important questions that we have to deal with.
I think we'll have to end it there. Thank you very much for another.